if anyone who's listening or watching has concerns about, their academic pedigree and ability to get into the industry, I can tell you from firsthand, you don't need to check all the boxes to, have a career in the field.
Today, we're examining cybersecurity education from an industry perspective with someone who understands the critical importance of a strong talent pipeline in our rapidly evolving threat landscape. Jack McKenna serves as president and chief executive officer of Prescient, a leading digital intelligence, investigations, and risk advisory firm. He has served as CEO since 2019 and previously was the firm's head of operations. Jack is based in the firm's Chicago headquarters and has served in various capacities at Prescient since joining the company in 2016 when he started as a due diligence analyst. Prescient helps multinational corporations, law firms, investors, and private clients mitigate risk and discover actionable intelligence using next-generation technology and tradecraft. His team operates at the intersection of cybersecurity, corporate security, complex disputes, and business intelligence. The team supports clients around the world from offices in the United States and Europe. And prior to Prescient, Jack worked in Singapore for German industrial conglomerate ThyssenKrupp and in New York as a research assistant with the New York City Police Department. He serves as a board member at Prescient's data subsidiary, District 4 Labs, on the Chicago Advisory Board for the Concussion Legacy Foundation, and on the membership committee for the Economic Club of Chicago. He earned degrees in political science and Chinese language from the University of Notre Dame. Jack brings a unique perspective to cybersecurity education, having built teams that require both analytical thinking as well as practical problem-solving skills. And his experience hiring and developing cybersecurity talent gives him valuable insights into what today's students need to succeed in the field. Jack, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Becky.
I know I just gave your introduction, but I would love still to just have you kind of give a moment to just say hello and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your company, Prescient.
Sure. So it's great to be here, and I appreciate you having me.
Sure.
I think I come to this with a unique perspective because I was a humanities guy in college. So I was like a foreign language major and a political science major, and then I sort of found myself in this, industry. So if anyone who's listening or watching has concerns about, their academic pedigree and ability to get into the industry, I can tell you from firsthand, you don't need to check all the boxes to, have a career in the field. And when I took over the company was way less focused in the cyberspace, and so we sort of built out those other capabilities. And so, in doing so, I've sort of seen how the market reacts to how you describe certain services and, different niches that I think we fill within the company. So, yes, the company does operate in the cyberspace, but I find that term is used pretty liberally. And so, I'm happy to talk more as we go through here, what areas of the field I think we operate in. And I think it's important to sort of disambiguate that term and realize that there's a lot of different, verticals within the cybersecurity field writ large.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to know just from your perspective as a CEO hiring cybersecurity professionals, let's start right off the bat with what skills or capabilities that you find most valuable when you're talking about a new graduate and what they need to showcase.
Mhm. So, I mean, when we hire people right out of college, we don't really expect that they have much prior experience. I think that's not unique to us either. Even people who have had internships at other cybersecurity companies or maybe were involved in classwork in college that gave them practical experience, you still want to kind of train people in your own way of doing things. So while that's helpful, it's certainly not required for us. Um, Depending on the type of cyber field that you go into, it may change, but for the most part, I think it's more about, attitude, willingness to learn. I also find writing skills often overlooked. Again, that's where the humanities background did help me. Now with LLMs and AI and stuff, I think some people are thinking that's less important, but I actually think that the people who do have the skills and then also know how to use technology to make themselves more efficient are the ones that are going to stand out. So I'm going to maybe reverse my answer to your question, meaning it's not the more technical stuff that matters for us. It's the other stuff.
Well, actually, kind of along those lines, how do you assess whether a candidate has just the practical problem solving abilities that the industry demands?
We don't hire people with a specific background, so I really like to get to know the person, and I think ask good interview questions. And I try to train our team to do that. I think in interviews sometimes they'll ask leading questions, and which are not that helpful. You want to really get to know the person. So regardless of your background, demonstrating an ability to perform under stressful conditions or under time constraints, and really being a good listener more than a good talker. I actually think are skills that we really look for. So in terms of how we assess that, in today's day and age, a lot of things are virtual, like this conversation. We do really press for in-person interviews as part of the process with every candidate, regardless of where they're going to work. And that's kind of where we get those interpersonal skills. So we do ask some open-ended questions. We ask about their background. We say, okay, how have you, reacted to situations like X, Y, and Z? And we kind of assess people that way. So it's a little bit more old school, I think. But we really want to get to know the person, and I'd rather hear about their experience dealing with stressful situations outside of the industry, because I know that if they can handle that, they can handle anything we throw at them here.
Right? True story. Absolutely. Stress is stress, no matter where you find it.
Yeah.
What gaps do you typically see between what students are learning academically and then when you have them in person, what they actually need to succeed professionally?
I do think it's changing a little bit, but a lot of the more selective schools or ones that are traditionally known that way have focused more on the theory. And you want to get a liberal arts education or you want to get a science education in theory, whatever, but you don't have the really practical skills. I'm actually okay with that personally. As I said, I'd rather have someone with a good attitude who can understand problem solving, and whether that's applied in the cyberspace or something else, they're going to do great. But I have seen, let's say in the incident response and digital forensics space, which is a service that we offer and we're starting to recruit more out of college for. Having people with tangible experience with the tools that sort of support that service is actually really important, because while it's not required, it does save us time. So if somebody at least understands, the fixed tools that are out there and has some limited working knowledge of them, it can be really helpful. So I'm not sure if Virginia Tech has a program like that, but we do recruit from Notre Dame, and they have a program where college students do internships and they support the local prosecutor's office on mobile forensics and finding digital evidence on laptops and stuff like that. So they're not going to be thrown into casework on their first day, but it can be very helpful. So if your curriculum is not offering you that hands-on experience in the cyber world, try to seek out internships or even something internal with Virginia Tech's IT department or wherever, where you can just start learning some of these systems. I think a nice mix is good, but it's not required.
When you talk about confidence level too, and that experiential learning, I would think, but I would love your thoughts on this, that a student that comes out with that hands-on experiential feel of a cyber range might just walk in the door a little more confident and be able to say, "Yeah, I know what John the Ripper is," or "Yeah, I've used the hacking tools," or I've done the thing. Um, Give me your thoughts on that and just how confidence level overall affects a new hire's ability to contribute effectively to your team.
I would say confidence in the concepts and the cyber concepts is actually way less important than having someone who's a confident speaker. And I think it would be a good coworker, because I have seen people who have internship experience and all this kind of stuff, and I think they think that they can just come in and immediately do the work. We've all had entry level jobs. Like, it's not going to be the sexiest, coolest thing on the first day. So I actually think someone who comes off as like, oh, I've done all this work before. It's like, okay, well, I'm interviewing you. Like, so I think it can kind of work against you sometimes. Um, where I think it can help you in an interview context is if you at least know the names of some of the tools they're going to be asked about or some of the concepts, you're going to feel better responding to that. Say, yeah, I'm aware of that. I've used it before. Obviously, I have room to learn, blah, 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 blah. Versus, if I were applying to a job that we're hiring for now, with my experience with like political science, I would have been totally lost. So then I think it would have been harder to kind of make that argument. Um, this is something we can talk about more too, but I think some of the most successful people that we've hired are self-taught. So they know they want to get into penetration testing or ethical hacking or red teaming or whatever. And so there's tons of free resources out there where you can learn some of the concepts, learn some of the terms, and be prepared in an interview context like that. I do think a lot of people are waiting to be taught that stuff in school.
Mhm.
And there's just so much resources out there that you could do it on your own.
Do you have any thoughts or advice for academic institutions when it comes to better understanding and responding to the evolving industry needs? Because we're talking about cybersecurity, which evolves every 5 seconds.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's hard, a school as large as Virginia Tech or some of these other places, sometimes it's like a little mini city. Even I find departments aren't talking to each other. So I would just recommend, if you're a student, make sure that you talk to your humanities department if that's what you're in, or you talk to your engineering, but then go outside of that. Like in college, I was in the arts, we call it arts and letters, like humanities, whatever. I didn't go over to the business school and be like, hey, what's going on over here in these areas? And you might get a couple roadblocks along the way, but explore that stuff. Because I've even seen, I go back and I talk at schools all the time. They'll say, well, our department has this great training program and it's open to everyone, but no one knows about it. And they think like a flyer on the cork board or whatever is going to get it's just such a big school. It's hard to do that in a lot of ways. So I think number one, when you're in school, going out and really exploring on your own the different areas and not just thinking that it's all consolidated in one area. And then for schools, just doing a better job of communicating what resources are available to students, regardless of their area of expertise or their major. Because I personally just don't think that's that important. I
Mhm.
always recommend like study what you think is interesting and what you're gonna, do well in. And then if you have skills along the way that you're gonna need for your career, you can get those on your own for the most part.
So when you're talking about when a student is using a cyber range, any thoughts on what students or educators should focus on when they are going the path of experiential learning? Any specific scenarios or skills that translate most directly to industry success?
If you want to just prepare everyone regardless of what they're going into, having some sort of coding experience is helpful. Python or Java or things like that. It may not always come up, but that stuff is kind of the back end to a lot of the tools that are out there, even some of the open source tools. So just having a limited amount of knowledge in those kind of coding languages is important. You asked another question I didn't really directly answer before, but I don't know to what extent these programs have industry leaders come in and talk about what they're doing. They'll do it for recruiting, but I don't know to what extent they actually talk to them about their curriculum. I have seen an openness from some schools to do that. But I would recommend it because there's a lot of times when they're teaching one thing and maybe the industry is like 5 years down the road on that stuff. So again, I'm not an educator. I've just seen that in other places that I've been. Um,
Yeah. Kind of along that thought process, any thoughts that you have on how industry and higher ed can collaborate to really, I guess you could say, elevate all ships in the harbor and make sure that people are getting what they need when they go out into the world? And maybe it's something like having speakers come, or I don't know. I would love to hear your
hmm.
thoughts on that.
It's interesting. So I do most of my recruiting at Notre Dame because I went there. I know a lot of people who work there. So they have a class, I think it's a 1 credit class as part of a few minors where they bring in industry alumni from industry and they come in and they talk about their background. It gives the students a chance to meet them, and then the professors will actually ask questions too about their curriculum and stuff like that. You could do that. I mean, it's pretty straightforward for the students. They have to go and attend and summarize and whatever, and it's a great opportunity. So um, it's almost like pre-networking, like networking before you have to. I think that's worked really well. I've seen that work. Um, I would say in the days before COVID, it was pretty clear. Okay, well, the folks who recruit our students are working in DC or New York or Richmond or Miami or whatever. It's harder now with remote because then you can't say, okay, well, Prescient's based in Chicago, they're going to come here or there. I don't go to Notre Dame because it's close to Chicago. I went there. So I mean, we are working in an office for the most part, but I think that's a little bit more challenging. So I have to give that some more thought. Um, I don't like career fairs. So I feel like there's like 900 different companies out there and they've got a booth and it's very superficial. So finding ways to like get beyond that, I think is important. And if it's a small group thing or you have office hours. So there's so much stuff that was going on in my undergrad experience that I did not take part in. So I just think if you're really concerned about this stuff and you're more academically inclined than I was, go be proactive and really engage, and don't just take that 20-minute meeting with your guidance counselor where they're just looking to get to the next person. It's not because they're bad, it's just they're busy. Just being kind of a self-starter.
Yeah. Looking ahead, what trends in cybersecurity threats or technology are you seeing that you think educational institutions should be preparing students for?
Well, that's not a hot take to say like AI and large language models and stuff like that is going to be a big part of it. But aside from that, knowing the back end of how they work is one thing, but it may just be super important to not just be able to create and write those models, but understanding how they work so you can basically take advantage of that technology and apply it to wherever you work. Um, so I'm sure schools are already doing that kind of stuff. But I also think, what's relevant to our space is all source intelligence. So in the cyberspace, it's, what areas of open source intelligence are applicable to the cybersecurity use case for threat intelligence. So just understanding that there's a huge proliferation of data out there, that is not going to stop anytime soon. There are going to be more regulation about what can go where, but being able to have the base skills to deal with large unstructured data sets, that will never go away. So I think at a base level, being able to do that will be super important, regardless of what field you end up in or what kind of vertical within cybersecurity you end up.
When it comes to like the US cyber range, for example, the focus really is on four-year institutions and balancing out that theoretical with that experiential so that you have, I don't know if you want to call it the well-rounded student, but someone who can talk theory, have the critical thinking skills. Educators can bring it on and just fold it into their curriculum. It's not really meant to replace it per se. But when academic leaders are looking at something like a cyber range, how would you say, all right, bring it on? This is how, at least from an industry standpoint, we think you should balance that theoretical rigor with that practical preparation.
Hmm. I think being open to the fact that there's a lot of different elements of cybersecurity. It's a different situation if you go into, let's say, cyber advisory or consulting at the Big Four or somewhere like that, where you're basically being brought in to advise companies on how to build their programs. That's a lot of policy writing. There's almost like an element of legal work in that, like actually like staying abreast of regulations and stuff. I think then you're going to have a lot of one-on-one time with your clients. And so forget cyber, just being able to communicate with people and listen and take notes. So there's that. And then there's the, proactive ethical hacking, red teaming, penetration testing, stuff like that. Investigative expertise and skills and having kind of a curious mind to chase down little rabbit holes and stuff. That's going to be super important with that stuff. And then if you go in-house and you're doing like, network security or systems engineer or security engineer, whatever, understanding, how systems and networks worked 10 years ago is actually important because you're generally not going to be dealing with companies that have like stayed exactly up to date with everything that's going on. So I tend to find people are really good at the new technology, but if they're given like Windows 98 or something, you'd be surprised how many companies are using old technology. So I think it would be a challenge to, I wouldn't recommend that the institutions try to stay up to date with everything that's going on. I think some of the concepts and the bare knowledge is going to be really important, but then being mindful of, trying to get someone to decide what area of cyber they want to go into, because you do kind of need to make that decision. I don't think it's particularly easy to pivot, if you're outside of 5 or 10 years. If you can do it in the beginning for sure, but just maybe educating people on the different options there are within the field, because it's not a monolith, and I think it's a mistake to think about it that way.
Those of us outside of industry, more on the higher ed side, at least, here at Virginia Tech, when we're talking about some of the articles we're reading and the students, helping them get out into the workforce, we hear a lot about the hiring gap in cybersecurity space. I would love to know from industry how you think that translates into the real world when it comes to not just growing your own company, but really the industry as a whole. Is it holding you back? Is the industry getting held back by not being able to fill these positions?
Um, I think it's possible. I think what I've seen is you sort of get on the consulting side because I'm not in industry, like I'm in the
Yeah.
cyber industry, but I'm not internal to a company. So on the consulting side, we need to staff up really quickly. And sometimes it's easier to just hire experienced people, either from an existing company or from somewhere else. So I actually see the gap as how do you start? Because I think it's hard to find organizations that will hire someone entry level out of college and do the things that you and I have been discussing, getting the training, all that stuff. So you find a lot of people who are like 3 to 5 years into the field or 5 to 7 years into the field, but like those early stage people, I think it's tough. So I think getting them some more practical knowledge than they're currently getting would be smart, but still keeping that like 60 or 70% of the curriculum focused on the concepts, I think is good too. Um, Whether it's holding us back or not, I mean, it's such a big space. There's no doubt about it. But I think there will be a catch up because people know it's important, and schools are going to respond to that too. So um, it's going to be impossible to do without staying abreast of the emerging tech and the LLMs and the AI. So if you're studying anything, at least understand how that stuff works, because it's inevitable. But doesn't mean you have to be focused on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think too that sometimes where the cyber range type or any kind of experiential learning comes into play, we hear so many students say, "Oh my gosh, we want a job and they won't hire us unless we have experience. But how do we get the experience unless they hire us?" It's like this cycle
Yeah,
that gets, I get it, it gets frustrating for students right out of college. I mean, our hope is obviously that the cyber range might help break that cycle and let them graduate with some experience, like you said,
yeah.
throw that in and move out. I would
I would
love.
also say just
Oh,
one quick thing, like
yeah.
it's easier to pivot within a company once you already work there. So even if you want to get into cybersecurity one day, take a job in operations or HR or whatever it is,
Mhm.
even if it's not strictly cyber related, and then you do a good job for the first 6 months to a year. You do some training on your own, you get some certs, and then you go to your manager, you go to whoever, and you say, "Hey, look, I want to get into this field." I find it's a lot easier to pivot internally when you're already there, or even to another company if that's what you want to do. So um, I always tell students like don't look for that perfect job. Like just get a job. And then it's way easier when you do that. So I always let people know that too. Obviously with the cyber range and everything you're talking about, it's better to have that, but it is very tough to get right out of college. So
Right.
be okay with starting with something and then pivoting.
So, advice, great advice on, hey, just get in the door. And then I think I would love to wrap it up with just this thought process of what it is for a cybersecurity graduate to stand out in today's competitive job market. I guess one, be willing to take not any job, but be willing to take not the job that might not be the sexiest, but any other thoughts above that that really helps them stand out to a Jack McKenna's of the world.
Mhm. I always like language skills. I'm partial to that because I was a Mandarin Chinese major in college. So I do think with LLMs and AI, that's getting easier, but you still need people to understand the nuance of what you're getting from some of those things. So I always like people with that because I think that makes me think that they're a curious person,
Mhm.
and they're smart. They can do pattern recognition and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's great. Um, but I think it's similar to sales. People buy from who they like. So work on those soft skills, those social skills, because if you have two people with the exact same resumes, you're probably going to hire the person who you got along with. So get out of your comfort zone, and be comfortable talking to people telephonically or in person. Also, if you really want a job and they're offering you a virtual interview, ask if you can do it in person. Even if it's far away, get on the freaking plane, get on the train, whatever it is, and go see them in person because I think that goes such a long way. Especially HR departments and here we get applications all the time. We're having conversations on Zoom and on the phone, whatever. When the people have said, "Hey, I don't know if you're hiring, for anything yet, but I'm in Chicago," whether they actually are or not, and then can I stop by your office? We say yes at all time. And
I
those
love
people
it.
are the ones that end up getting the job. So that's not going away anytime soon. And even if the younger generation is more comfortable with the remote thing, the older generation usually the ones hiring. So they like that kind of stuff. So I always the soft skills I think are super important because there's tons of smart people there's tons of people graduating with homeland security degrees and cybersecurity degrees and whatever. And you got to assume everyone that's applying has the same skills. So I don't think this skill is going to make you stand out. It's going to be your story, your personality, and how you present yourself.
I love it. Jack, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
My pleasure.
We've been talking with Jack McKenna, CEO of Prescient, and thank you to our listeners for joining us for Next Gen Cyber, the Future of Cybersecurity, a podcast of the U.S. Cyber Range.